Hello everyone, tonight we are leaning in close to a rock slab under UV light. You squint, there's a curl of what looks like a tail, but it's the eye socket that gets you. Just there at the edge of the ridge, deep, dark, and angled upward like it knows you're watching. That fossil has been dead for over 300 million years, but something about it feels a little too recent. You're in a paleobiology lab, by the way. Fluorescent lights hum. Somebody's coffee smells like despair, and a technician mutters, "It moved," before laughing to themselves. They're joking? Probably. The fossil in question comes from a time before dinosaurs, before mammals, even before proper land plants grew roots deep enough to cause plumbing issues. And tonight, we're going to tell its story. But just a heads up, you probably won't survive in the world this little lizard lived in. The oxygen is low. The insects are the size of your cat, and the weather feels like a sauna powered by a dragon's breath. You're soft. You're warm. You sweat through your shirt just from thinking too hard. This lizard didn't sweat. It didn't blink. It didn't need to run. It just waited. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Also, post your location and local time in the comments so I can see who else is wandering the time tunnels with us. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. You're in a swamp. Not your average frog-singing, mist-floating fairy tale swamp. No, this one is hot, wet, and ancient, older than any myth, older than bones. The trees around you are freakishly tall, more like skyscrapers dressed in bark and mildew than anything leafy. Their roots spread across the mud like fingers clawing for breath. And beneath them, silence. No birds, no flowers, not even the rustle of mammals. They haven't been invented yet. You kneel. There's something in the dirt. It's a fossil. Slender limbs, slight ribs, delicate digits curled inward as if holding its last breath forever. You might call it a lizard, but technically it's Casineria. Not quite reptile, not quite amphibian, just something in between faking categories the way it might have faked death. Here's the fact that gives paleontologists migraines. Casineria's body is perfectly preserved in a position that looks like it just collapsed. The limbs aren't scattered like they would be if it got eaten. The bones aren't jumbled like if a river carried it off. They're arranged, as if it placed itself there. The rocks around it whisper Scotland. Carboniferous. That's about 340 million years ago, give or take a mass extinction or two. Historians still debate whether Casineria was more like a reptile or a modern amphibian. That sounds like taxonomy stuff. Which it is, but it also means they can't decide whether this creature slithered through dry land or squelched through marshes, whether it stalked insects like a tiny crocodile or burrowed like a salamander. But one thing seems clear: when danger came, it didn't run. It froze, pretended it was dead. Let the world move around it. Some modern lizards still do this, of course. Thanatosis, it's called, plain dead. A good tactic when your predator is dumb enough to be fooled by stillness. And if you're really lucky, you get fossilized in that same pose, tricking not just your hunter, but every future scientist with a microscope. But maybe the weirdest part. That fossil was found curled up inside a tree stump. Imagine that. You're this little creature, and when the skies darken or a giant millipede starts moving your way, you climb into a log, tuck yourself in, and wait so quietly that the log forgets you're there. And if you're unlucky, mud floods in and fossilizes you. But if you're really lucky, you survive. You crawl out, and your descendants evolve into creatures that eventually Google themselves. So here's your first odd fact of the night. Some tree stumps in the Carboniferous were so tall and hollow, animals treated them like elevators. Multiple fossils have been found stacked in vertical layers, like tenants in a grim apartment complex. Now imagine you're lying flat inside one of those tree elevators. Your ribs press gently against moss. Your eyelids don't twitch. You wait. And then 30 floors above your little hollow, a centipede the size of a skateboard crunches past. You don't move. Historians still debate whether this kind of behavior was conscious or instinctive. But we're not here to answer that. We're here to listen to the silence, the practiced patient stillness of a creature that didn't blink for millions of years. Casineria's bones are fragile, thin as a modern frog's leg, but its patience. That thing was titanium. Back in the lab, someone flips off the UV lamp. The fossil goes dark, and the eye socket, still watching. You're still kneeling next to the fossil, wondering if the eye socket really just seemed to glance upward, or if you finally spent too many nights staring at things that stopped breathing before your species had kneecaps. Casineria, they called it. It's not a household name like T-Rex, but then again, not every survivor throws a tantrum. Some just outweighed extinction with the elegance of a shrug. Or maybe more accurately, a blank stare and complete refusal to move. You shift in your chair or tree stump depending on how immersive you're being, and imagine this, a shallow pool. Spongy soil. Steam curls off decaying ferns. And they're barely noticeable against the bark of a rotten log is a motionless shape no longer than your hand. You stare, it doesn't blink. It doesn't breathe. You squint. Did its eye just narrow? Nope, you just blinked. Some paleontologists believe Casineria was one of the first vertebrates to walk truly on land without returning to the water to lay eggs, which is, in evolutionary terms, the biological equivalent of moving out of your mom's basement. It's also why some researchers suggest this little thing might be on the stem line leading toward amniotes, a fancy word for the crew that evolved into reptiles, birds, and mammals, including, inconveniently, us. So, if you want to make this personal, Casineria might have been your ancestor, or your great-aunt's neighbor's cousin from the Carboniferous. Either way, it had legs under its body, not sprawled out like a salamander. It may have blinked at the concept of water dependency and said, "Nah, I'm good." Bold. But here's where it gets weird. At least 3 different fossil specimens of Casineria, or similar small lizard-like tetrapods, have been found in post-threat poses. Not scattered by predators, not tossed by floods, just curled, arms folded in, tail gently curved. As if someone said everyone freeze and they took it literally. One of them is even preserved with the skull tucked beneath a forelimb, almost like a sleeping dog. But no nesting material, no eggs, no food cache. Just bones wrapped around themselves in a pose that feels more emotional than practical. Historians still debate whether this was a death pose caused by dehydration or neurological spasms, or if it was something more behavioral like the equivalent of playing dead. But try telling a modern opossum that its dramatic fainting is just a death posture and see how offended it gets. And the real twist. This little lizard's tactic freezing into stillness didn't die with it. Today, some reptiles, amphibians, and even birds pull off elaborate playing dead performances. Hognose snakes will flip over tongue out, belly up, drooling like a cartoon villain. Some frogs puff themselves up, then collapse dramatically. And there's one species of beetle that plays dead for hours just to avoid being eaten by birds that lose interest. So the lizard who blinked last, it might have been the first in a very long tradition. Here's a lighter note while you mentally curl into a ball, like Casineria sloths have been known to mistake their own arms for tree branches and fall. That has nothing to do with anything, but it's a reminder that survival strategies don't always need to be dignified to work. You walk carefully through the swamp of your imagination, now watching where you step. The mud underfoot is a living thing. Somewhere to your left, a dragonfly the size of a salad plate buzzes by its wings, slicing the air like glass knives. You crouch slowly, and there it is again, just at the base of a tree trunk. Still as a dropped twig. Casineria. Its ribs rise once, maybe twice, then nothing. A predator thunders past behind you, some early arthropod on stilts, a centipede with ambition, a shadow with mandibles. You don't turn to look, you stay very still, just like the lizard. There's a reason most predators go for movement. Evolution has built their brains to ignore the background. And Casineria, despite having bones light enough to snap under its own confusion, became background. Historians still argue whether this was instinct or accident. Was Casineria actively hiding or just too cold to move? Was it a choice? Did it know fear, or was its stillness simply the default of a creature too far ahead of its time to flinch? Maybe it didn't blink. Maybe it didn't have to. Here's something to chew on before your next midnight snack. Some modern reptiles can slow their heart rate to less than 1 beat per minute. Crocodiles have been recorded holding their breath underwater for over 2 hours. You try that, and you'll meet your great-aunt's carboniferous neighbor real fast. So next time you freeze in an awkward social situation and hope to disappear into the wallpaper, just know that some of your oldest evolutionary cousins invented that trick. And in some ancient swamp it worked. The predator walked on. Casineria exhaled maybe and carried stillness forward into history, one heartbeat at a time. You're squatting now, yes again, by a patch of stone that used to be mud, tracing faint indentations with the tip of your finger. 3 toes, then 2, then nothing. The trail just stops. You glance up, half expecting to see something dangling from the trees, but there are no trees. Just towering lycopods, giant club mosses that resemble toilet brushes on stilts, and a canopy too high to whisper anything useful. Whatever left these footprints stepped once, twice, maybe hesitated, and then vanished. Welcome to the Carboniferous period, where the ground is soft. The predators are weird and creatures disappear like bad ideas in a group chat. Fossil trackways like these are rare, fragile, and often more honest than bones. Bones lie. They show you the dead. Tracks show you who moved, who hesitated, who thought about turning left but didn't. And when those tracks end mid-stride, it sends a ripple of confusion through every lab coat in the building. You shift your weight and try to follow the trail again, but it really does just stop. Some researchers think this means the animal climbed something, maybe a root. Others think it jumped. But a few, those with enough coffee and existential dread in their bloodstream, suggest something else. It froze. Imagine this. You're a small tetrapod, not quite a lizard, not quite anything that makes it into children's books. You're moving across the swampy terrain. You hear something, or feel it through the soft mud under your belly. Something big, something with pincers, and you stop, just like that. You curl your toes, pull your limbs inward, press your stomach flat against the earth. You let your heart slow, your breath vanish, and you become part of the mud. Historians still debate whether these trackways are truly interrupted by conscious freezing, or if it's just a case of erosion sediment layers, or classic excuse missing data. But when it happens again and again across multiple sites, the pattern starts to whisper. And you know how dangerous whispers can be in ancient places. Here's your authoritative fact. Some carboniferous trackways, like those in the Horton Bluff Formation in Nova Scotia, show short, deliberate strides, followed by a sudden break, no turning, no fleeing. Almost as if the animal intentionally stopped. No predator tracks follow, no chaos, just stillness, and then nothing. We have no idea what that animal did next. It may have resumed its walk later, just out of range. It may have been plucked upward by a predator that left no trace. Or it may have stood there for an hour, breathing once every 5 minutes until the danger passed and the mud erased the rest. You know those times you pause a movie, walk away, and come back to find someone has moved your popcorn, but nothing else changed? Same energy. The scene is frozen, but something happened. Here's a fact that has nothing to do with fossils. In the 1950s, pigeons were trained to guide missiles by pecking at enemy ship images on screens. They were good at it, very still, very focused. Then we invented guidance systems and decided birds didn't need jobs. Still, it makes you wonder how much stillness we underestimate. Anyway, back to the swamp. You picture the little tetrapod motionless, blending into the roots. Its skin likely speckled or patterned like bark doesn't shimmer. It doesn't advertise. This isn't a flashy creature. No sail, no frill, just legs and lungs and a dangerous talent for standing perfectly still. And that's when it hits you. The bones we find aren't always the ones that moved the most. Sometimes they're the ones that moved the least. The ones that lay so still they didn't get crushed, scattered, scavenged. They just sank. Slowly, quietly, into mud that remembered them. Historians still argue about interpreting silence. Is a missing track a symbol of action? Or is it the record of inaction? Is the fossil gap a mystery or a message? You think of ghosts. Ghosts never leave footprints either. Here's your joke ration for the moment. These carboniferous creatures were so stealthy even ghost crabs would have taken notes. If Casineria were around today, it'd win every staring contest and probably ghost you afterward. Paleontologists trying to explain these broken trackways are basically detectives at a crime scene where the victim suspect and furniture have all disappeared. You kneel by another slab. This one shows a tight cluster of footprints that spiral inward as if something circled itself and then stopped. In the middle, no fossil, no bones, just the imprint of a belly and a long tail dragging into nothing. This is when you stop thinking about running or hunting or even hiding. This is when you realize that in this ancient world, survival often meant not moving at all. The still survive. Not the fastest, not the strongest, just the stillest. You glance at the trackway again. Those little footprints. They belong to something that blinked at death and waited, and just maybe lived to do it again. You're sweating now, and not just because the carboniferous swamp air feels like the inside of a kettle someone forgot to turn off. It's the trees. They're wrong. You're looking up at trunks wider than most modern living rooms, stretching so high they blur into the foggy sky. The bark is patterned like cracked armor and there's no breeze, no rustling leaves, just ferns, spores, silence, and then a breath. Yours, loud, way too loud. Because in this world, the trees aren't decorations. They're the lungs of the planet. They're the reason you're able to exist here at all. Before this forest exploded in size, the Earth's oxygen levels were like a tired whisper. Then trees figured out how to grow tall, and the planet gasped in response. Authoritative fact of the evening. During the late Carboniferous, oxygen levels climbed to over 30% compared to our modern 21%. That's why bugs grew enormous. That's why fires could flash into infernos. That's why even a tiny lizard playing dead might have had an easier time holding its breath. It was living in an oxygen-rich world that practically encouraged stillness. But back to the trees. They're mostly lycopods, calamites, and ancient relatives of modern horsetails. Their branches shoot out near the top, forming a canopy so far above you that it may as well be a different ecosystem entirely. And these trees are clever. Some drop leaves that mimic curled-up bodies. Others let their bark flake off in patterns that resemble motionless creatures. You think it's a trick? It is? This forest lies. Somewhere beneath your feet, a lizard has tucked itself beneath a fallen frond that looks exactly like a sleeping animal. You brush one aside. Another one drops into place leaf by leaf like a slow-motion avalanche of camouflage. You're not sure what's plant and what's pretending to be dead. And then you find it. Not a bone, not a fossil. A perfectly preserved negative space. A mold. As if a creature pressed itself into the soil and left only its outline, no skeleton, no remains, just a suggestion of where it had been. Historians still debate whether such impressions are evidence of actual creatures or the result of decaying plant matter. Some argue these are nothing more than rotted fronds. Others insist they show signs of limb articulation. They argue politely until someone throws a fern model across the conference table. You crouch again. Your thighs ache, but you're invested now. Inside one of the leaf molds, there's something odd, tiny claw marks near the edges, as if the creature clung there for a while unmoving, waiting, playing dead under a leaf designed to look like something that had already died. Odd fact time. Some modern birds will pretend to be injured to lead predators away from their nests. The performance is uncanny. But these carboniferous lizards, they didn't have time to act. Their survival depended on being still before the danger even noticed them. Stillness was proactive. Stillness was preloaded. Here's something that'll mess with your sense of evolutionary pride. These creatures didn't just rely on camouflage, they shared it with their environment. Plants didn't evolve leaves that just looked like leaves. They evolved shapes that mimicked the poses of motionless animals, and maybe vice versa. Maybe lying still on a forest floor cluttered with rotting fronds and bark spirals wasn't just hiding. Maybe it was joining the ecosystem's lie. You weren't pretending to be dead, you were pretending to be plant litter. Less dramatic, sure, but 1,000 times more effective. You want jokes. All right, in the Carboniferous, your best defense was being mistaken for a really boring piece of mulch. These plants and lizards were basically cosplaying each other at an evolutionary Comic-Con. Even the bugs were in on the act. There are fossil cockroaches with wings that look like twigs having an existential crisis. You step carefully now, realizing the entire ground may be covered in impressions of lives that didn't move fast enough or didn't need to. This brings us to the strange thing about plant fossils. They often die more dramatically than animals. A frond bursts into flame, a trunk snaps in half, and you get evidence of an event. But with these lizard-like creatures, they seem to disappear. No sign of struggle, no indication of distress, just stillness, sometimes preserved, sometimes not, sometimes mistaken for a leaf. And you start to wonder, how many of these early animals didn't become fossils because they moved too soon? How many are missing from the record not because they died, but because they survived? That's a weird twist, isn't it? You only get remembered if you fail. Historians don't agree on whether we're looking at a natural burial site or an accidental collaboration between animal and leaf. But the patterns there, life forms becoming indistinguishable from death forms. A forest that writes stillness into its soil. You pause beside one last impression, this one deeper than the rest. The claws dug in hard, the tail curled gently. It's empty now. It was always empty. But you lean in just to check. You're lying down now. No shame in it. The forest floor is soft if you pretend it's not mostly decaying plant matter and the occasional prehistoric bug husk. The humidity clings to your skin like wet cling wrap. Something in your shirt collar is moving. Ignore it. In front of you is a fossil slab cracked right down the middle like someone tried to fold it in half. It's labeled with a tag specimen A217 coiled death pose, a common term in paleontology, but tonight you don't buy it. Because here's the thing, they all look the same. These early tetrapods frozen in fossil beds from Scotland to Nova Scotia often show the exact same posture, curled tail, tucked limbs, neck bent to one side, as if they just rolled into a nap they forgot to wake up from. They call it the resting pose. Sometimes the death spiral, but here's the academic guesswork baked into every fossil that pose is the result of death, not behavior. And tonight, we're going to stretch that assumption until it creaks. You trace the fossil with your fingertip. The tail winds like a comma. The spine bows inward, and the skull isn't screaming, it's nestled, quiet. Authoritative fact. This curled-up pose is found in countless vertebrate fossils from the Paleozoic and Mesozoic. It was long believed to be caused by opisthotonus, a kind of death spasm, caused by brain trauma or asphyxiation leading to a backward arch. But some paleontologists have started to ask, what if it's not rigor mortis? What if it's a survival behavior caught mid-performance? In modern animals, curling up is often a defensive posture. Hedgehogs, armadillos, pangolins, they all go full fetal when the world gets hostile. Reptiles, too. A threatened gecko might tuck in tail tight to its side, eyes closed, limbs drawn in like it's trying to disappear into itself. And if that gecko were to die in that pose? Fossilized. Would we call it a death throw? Historians still debate whether curled poses in early tetrapods are due to post-mortem muscle contractions drying tissues or conscious behavior. The debate gets snippy. Someone once described a rival theory as preposterous gymnastics for the sake of novelty. This, by the way, was in Nature, not YouTube comments. You shift your focus to the ribs. The spacing looks natural, not distorted like something gasping. The spine isn't shattered. The limbs aren't splayed. It doesn't look like suffering, it looks like shelter. And maybe that's what it was. Maybe the first great evolutionary lie wasn't camouflage, wasn't mimicry. It was this, I'm not in danger, I'm asleep. You hear it again in modern life. Possums keel over, play dead, and even release a smell that would make a raccoon gag. Some snakes go limp tongues out. And in a more relatable twist, some humans have laid very still on awkward first dates just to avoid being noticed. You feel something crunch near your elbow. A fossilized fern fragment curled just like the lizard. This is the forest's rhythm, coiling and withdrawing, retreating into itself when threatened. It's less of a reaction and more of a ritual. Odd fact. During hibernation, certain frogs literally allow themselves to freeze. Heart stops. Blood crystallizes. They lie in the snow for months, then thaw and hop away like nothing happened. It's not death, it's seasonal pretending. Which brings us to the performance. You kneel again over the fossil slab looking at a second specimen, a juvenile, smaller, more delicate. Also curled. But here's the twist, a second impression lies next to it, slightly offset shallower. Almost like it shifted, as if it changed positions after the initial pose was made. Historians still debate whether such double impressions mean movement before final burial or just geological artifact. The rock layers love to mess with you. They're petty like that. But you start to imagine the pose not as a moment of death but a survival maneuver. The animal coils tightly, lowers its body temp, shuts everything down. It waits. And maybe, just maybe, it uncoils later, unseen. You want jokes? Let's do it. Paleontologists call it a death pose. Introverts call it Tuesday. If Casineria had a motto, it would be curl up, shut up, survive. Somewhere in this fossil bed is the prehistoric ancestor of your do not disturb setting. The death pose becomes less about endings and more about endurance. The creature isn't flailing, it's folding inward. It's reducing itself to a question mark in a world of exclamation points. You lie back looking at the canopy far above, if you can call this chlorophyll monolith a canopy. Light filters through spores and mist, and everything feels ancient in a way that doesn't care about your calendar. And you wonder if we misread this one pose for centuries. How many other stories have we mistaken for endings? Maybe some of these fossils aren't portraits of death. Maybe they're paused scenes. Locked muscles, suspended breath, ancient patience trapped in rock like a secret waiting to be misunderstood. You rise. Something crunches under your foot. It coils faintly. Or maybe it always had. You don't move for a while. There's something about this forest floor, the way it presses back, that makes you feel like if you stay still long enough, you'll become part of it. A patch of moss, a shadow under bark, maybe even a fossil in the making if you're lucky and not in a rush. Welcome to the most crowded neighborhood in deep time, the Carboniferous leaf litter. It's not made of leaves the way you know them, no oaks, no maples, just a thick, moist quilt of ancient plant debris. Fallen fronds, scale bark bits of club moss, all soggy and motionless. But don't let that fool you. This carpet is alive with things that barely admit to being alive. You part a tangle of dead vegetation. Something glistens, not movement, just a change in shadow. And there it is again. Casineria, or something close to it. Flattened against the soiled toes, spread tail curved like a fallen twig. It doesn't flinch. It doesn't care that you're watching. Or maybe it's just really good at pretending. You get the distinct sense you're not seeing it. You're being tolerated by it. Authoritative fact. Fossil beds from the Carboniferous period show a remarkable abundance of small vertebrates, often preserved with near-perfect fidelity in what used to be forest floors. These layers, like those at Joggins in Canada or the East Kirkton Quarry in Scotland, are so detailed that they've revealed skin impressions, claw sheaths, and even stomach contents. And many of them were buried where they lived under the leaf litter. But here's what's strange. Predators are rare. Not absent, but strangely underrepresented. It's like showing up to a crime scene where only the victims are home reading quietly. You'd expect chaos. You get stillness. Historians still debate whether this means predators were simply rarer back then, or if the prey species had figured something out, some way of becoming unappetizing, invisible, or inconvenient to hunt. One theory: stillness. You crouch beside a half-fossilized burrow. The walls are lined with pressed ferns. Inside, the impression of a curled body, no bones, no scat, no sign of violence, just the outline of something that waited here and maybe walked out later. Odd fact for your pocket. Some modern lizards can remain in torpor for weeks, barely burning energy. In fact, certain geckos can cling upside down to a cave ceiling, eyes half shut for so long they grow algae on their backs. Scientists once mistook them for mold. The lizard didn't mind. You feel that here. That patience, that biological poker face. There's a reason this swamp seems quiet. It's full of performers, expert stillness artists, and they're all lying just under the surface, hoping the world will forget them long enough to survive it. And they're not alone. You pull back a frond. Below it, a beetle. Not just any beetle, but one with wings patterned like a wet leaf. You blink. It doesn't. It wants to be mistaken for garbage. And the lizard beside it. Same idea. Not faking life, not even faking death, just faking irrelevance. Here's something that might make you re-examine your furniture. Some modern animals, including spiders, frogs, and snakes, engage in tonic immobility, a state of almost total stillness triggered by fear or stress. It's not unconscious. It's a decision. Or close enough. Their bodies simply stop being worth attention. And so did the early tetrapods. Joke time. The Carboniferous swamp where looking like trash was a full-time career. If Netflix had existed here, every lizard would still just be buffering. Even the predators got bored trying to find prey. Forget it. I'll eat a fern. You step forward and feel something soft give underfoot. Don't worry. It's just the echo of something that used to be alive. Probably. The swamp is full of those. And above you, barely audible, something scuttles through the trees. A giant arthropod, maybe? It doesn't see you, or maybe it does and you're just doing a really good Casineria impression right now. Well done. You duck behind a stump more out of instinct than need and peer into the gloom. Around you, the air buzzes with spores. There's no roar, no screech, no battle, just the hiss of stillness. This place doesn't do drama. It does patience. The leaf litter isn't just a floor, it's a strategy. A camouflage network. A stage where every actor plays dead until the curtain closes and the danger passes. The creatures who live here don't flee. They fade. You sit back and realize something unsettling. The reason we found these creatures at all fossilized so delicately isn't because they died violently. It's because they died still. Or better yet, they lived still. Their deaths were quiet. Their poses practiced. Their performances so subtle they left impressions deeper than their bones. You reach for another slab. Just a faint body shape. No skeleton. No name. Just the outline of something that understood the ancient rule. Be quiet. Be still. Be forgotten. But not too forgotten. Just enough to survive. You don't speak now. Not out of reverence, though that would be fair, but because everything here has mastered silence far better than you ever could. The Carboniferous swamp is still humming, but beneath that hum is another sound. A kind of waiting. You're standing at the edge of a slope, a low incline, where the earth once sagged and softened with rain. The fossil slab beneath your feet comes from here, and it holds something. Incomplete. A burrow. Not a perfect one. Not the neat spiral homes you see in glossy nature documentaries about badgers or moles. This one is crude, shallow, as if someone started digging and then changed their mind or vanished. You kneel brushing sediment away from the edges of the preserved tunnel. It curls just slightly before cutting off. At the deepest point, there's a smear of bone. Not a full skeleton, not even a complete limb. Just a few phalanges, finger bones, pressed into ancient mud like someone curled their hand around a fear and never got the chance to let go. Authoritative fact. Several early tetrapods from the Carboniferous have been found fossilized inside burrows or shallow hollows, what paleontologists call resting traces. One remarkable site in Pennsylvania even preserved a small amphibian-like vertebrate in a coiled pose inside a burrow, suggesting it may have died while sheltering from flood or heat. But here's the twist: some of these fossils show no signs of decay, scavenging, or struggle, just quiet. You reach farther in and realize the burrow doesn't end. It just becomes harder to follow, fainter, as if the creature might have kept going, dragging its belly through a softer patch of soil that didn't fossilize well. It's the paleontological equivalent of a half-written sentence that trails into ellipses. Maybe it lived. Historians still debate whether these half-fossilized burrows are evidence of survival behavior or just unfinished business. Some suggest the animal was buried alive. Others think it escaped and we're only seeing the moment before the story turned hopeful, and maybe that's what makes it unnerving. The possibility that this fossil is not a tomb, but an exit wound. You lean closer. There's a ridge along one side of the burrow, scratch marks. Parallel, regular, like claws brushing the side on the way out. Or in. Odd fact break. The desert rain frog native to Namibia will bury itself up to 20 inches underground during dry seasons and remain motionless for months. It enters a metabolic near-death state called estivation. It's not asleep. It's waiting for rain. And when it finally surfaces, it sounds like a squeaky toy dipped in fear. Not all survivors are graceful. But your lizard, it didn't squeak, it slid. It may have sensed the approaching flood or the vibration of an arthropod's footsteps and made a decision. Downward, inward, into the safety of root-tangled earth. It curled in place, maybe slowed its heartbeat, maybe closed its eyes. And then, we don't know. That's the thing about fossils. They don't end. They just stop telling us things. You shift your flashlight beam and catch another detail, a second burrow right next to the first. Shallower, a little wider, empty. That's the thing that rattles you a bit. These aren't tombs. They're rooms, and maybe someone got out. Here come your jokes, carefully wrapped in layers of existential dread. Ancient lizard burrows the original studio apartments, damp, dark, and just big enough to survive in. This lizard wasn't hiding from predators. It was dodging rent. If quiet quitting had a prehistoric version, this was it. Dig a hole, disappear. See if anyone notices in 300 million years. You trace the edge of the slab and find something stranger, still a leaf impression that overlaps the opening of the burrow. No bones, no footprints, just that delicate pressure of fern that drifted down after the creature entered. That means this burrow wasn't exposed for long. It sealed itself. Whether by mud, rain, or accident doesn't matter. The creature inside was gone, or hidden, or both. You imagine that moment, a quiet descent into stillness. Not a panicked scramble, but a choice. A withdrawal from danger, not with claws or speed, but by becoming part of the ground itself. Stillness wasn't a reaction. It was a strategy. And in this place, it may have worked for longer than any other. You think back to earlier fossils, those coiled bodies, those vanishing trackways, and now you wonder how many of those stories ended where they began. How many of those creatures died faking death? And how many simply paused long enough to make history forget the difference? The forest hasn't moved. It's still whispering spores through the air. The leaf litter clings to your boots like it wants you to join it. And under your hand, the ancient burrow breathes. Not literally, but almost. You wake up if you ever slept next to a tree that isn't a tree. It's a column of bark-covered strategy rooted not in soil, but in a timeline so deep it swallows names. The canopy hasn't shifted. The mist hasn't lifted. The swamp is still doing what it does best, pretending it has no idea you're here. But you're thinking about predators now. Because for all the quiet we've seen, the curled fossils, the vanishing tracks, the fake deaths, there's something missing. Something should be hunting. Something with teeth. And yet the fossil record in these places is lopsided. We find the prey fossilized in detail down to the tips of their tiny toes, but not the jaws that should have chased them. Where are the hunters? You brush your fingers across a fossil slab, one filled with overlapping leaf impressions, and two coiled lizards both preserved like dropped ribbons. No tooth marks, no crushed bones, just stillness. Again, authoritative fact. In sites like the East Kirkton Quarry, known for preserving early terrestrial ecosystems, paleontologists consistently find more small-bodied tetrapods and invertebrates than large carnivores. It's a trend repeated across multiple Carboniferous locations. The prey is present in abundance. The predators barely leave a whisper. Historians still debate why. Was it a problem of fossilization bias? Did predators simply decay in less preservable places? Or were they just few and far between? Some argue it was an arms race that never got off the ground. Others suggest the prey species won not by fighting but by disappearing. You glance at a nearby slab tagged with a familiar name, Hylonomus lyelli, one of the earliest known reptiles. Tiny, ribcage like a comb. Preserved in a stump as if it had snuck in for shelter and either stayed too long or left just before the end. You imagine it curled at the bottom of a hollow log body, still breath thinner than fog. No claw marks on the bark, no gnashing teeth waiting outside, just a predator that never found it. Here's your odd fact for the day. Some sea cucumbers, when threatened, eject their internal organs to confuse attackers. Then they just slowly grow them back. This has nothing to do with reptiles. It just proves that when survival gets weird, everyone brings something to the table. But your little lizard didn't eject anything. It didn't run. It didn't leap into water or scream or sprout spikes. It just knew how to vanish, not disappear physically, just become unremarkable. Here's the thing. Most predators aren't looking for creatures, they're looking for movement. For shadows that flinch, for the flutter of a limb, for the flash of something trying not to be noticed. And what Casineria and its cousins perfected was the art of not performing. Historians still debate whether the absence of predators is a trick of the geological record or an actual reflection of ecosystem dynamics. But if it's the latter, we're staring at a world where prey species evolved not to fight, not to flee, but to unexist just long enough. You sit on a patch of fossilized roots. There are hundreds of tiny impressions beneath you, tails, bellies, drag marks. A community of creatures that lived by becoming the forest floor. Joke time. The Carboniferous, where the best defense was a total personality blackout. These lizards were so quiet even their predators gave up. Too much effort. Gary, I'm going vegetarian. Some creatures hunt, some hide, and some just delete their own user profile until further notice. You look again at the fossil slab. There's a little scratch pattern beside one of the coiled bodies, 3 lines parallel, like a claw dragged across soft mud. But no follow-through, no signs of struggle, just approach, stop, retreat. You tilt your head. Could it be a predator that changed its mind? Maybe it paused, sniffed the air, tilted its head at the still body, waited, listened, found no heartbeat worth chasing, and moved on. You feel the weight of that idea. That stillness wasn't just a reaction, it rewrote the rules of visibility. If the predator doesn't see you, not just with eyes, but with expectations, you're safe. You're nothing, and in that nothingness, you win. The fossil record doesn't say who outlived whom. Not clearly. It just shows who got buried, who got caught in the right kind of mud. But you're starting to suspect that some of these creatures aren't fossils of the dead. They're fossils of the hidden. You step into a shaft of dappled light and feel it shift on your skin. This world has no loudness, no chase scenes, only the hum of plants, the patience of prey, and the strange, gaping absence of hunger with teeth. Stillness didn't just keep them safe. It emptied the forest of screams. You lean against the fossilized remains of what used to be a tree trunk and try not to think about your own heartbeat. But now that you can feel it, right there tucked in your chest like a skittish animal. Thud, thud, thud. It's hard not to feel a little self-conscious about it when you're surrounded by creatures who might have survived by not having one at all. At least not for a while. Let's talk about heartbeats. Specifically, how some animals seem to make theirs vanish. You glance down at the fossil slab in front of you, another curled-up thing with the ribs all pulled in close like it died whispering a secret to itself. But what if it wasn't dead when it curled like that? What if it was simply slowing down? Authoritative fact. Certain modern reptiles like the painted turtle Chrysemys picta can survive without oxygen for over 4 months during winter by lowering their heart rate dramatically, sometimes down to 1 beat every 10 minutes. Some frogs can freeze solid heart-stopped entirely for weeks and thaw out in spring like nothing happened. Scientists call this metabolic depression. Survival by stillness. And if that sounds like myth, remember it works. In freezing temperatures, low oxygen water, or seasonal droughts, these animals enter a state that walks the line between life and fossil. Which brings us back to Casineria and its kin. Imagine it now, soft belly pressed to swamp mud, body temperature dropping as clouds roll in and oxygen dips. It curls into a tight pose. The forest breathes over it. Its heart flutters once, maybe twice, then waits. Historians still debate whether such abilities existed in Carboniferous tetrapods. There's no direct fossil evidence of heartbeats after all. But some paleobiologists argue that the preserved postures and undisturbed burials suggest a level of physiological control, not just panic-driven hiding, but deliberate dormancy. Odd fact time. There's a species of African spiny mouse that can survive losing large patches of skin and regenerate them with minimal scarring. No relation to Casineria, but it's a reminder that biology often favors the weird, not the dramatic. You kneel again, tracing the gentle arc of a rib cage pressed into stone. The spacing between the ribs seems too regular. No signs of crushing, no desperation. Just a pose that suggests comfort, or at least patience. You're starting to see a pattern here. Stillness isn't just about hiding. It's about enduring. It's about becoming so quiet, so low-powered, so nearly nothing, that the world forgets to kill you. You reach for your notebook, or, let's be honest, the nearest patch of clean bark, and begin sketching the idea. What if this wasn't just a lizard that stopped moving? What if it stopped being temporarily? Joke drop. Casineria the only roommate who would fake death just to avoid helping with chores. If this lizard had a Fitbit, it'd just be one long flatline followed by, "Congratulations, you achieved total biological silence." Still, hearts don't get broken or predated. You look up and realize you haven't heard anything move for hours. The swamp's like that. It doesn't do movement, it just waits for you to forget it's alive. You peer into another fossil bed where multiple impressions overlap, a blur of tails, limbs, and drag marks. But there's no sign of conflict, no chase, just animals entering the mud and stopping. Did they all die here, or did they gather here to survive something? A drought, a fire, a predator they couldn't fight but might outweight. Historians still debate how many of these fossil clusters are mass death events versus communal dormancy gone wrong. It's a morbid coin toss. Heads, they were hibernating. Tails, they were overwhelmed. You press your hand into the earth beside the fossil. It's warm, not physically, but in that strange imagined way that old things hum. It feels like it remembers something you're not allowed to know. And you wonder, if Casineria had the ability to slow its heart to slip into near life, did it pass that trait down? Through the tangled mess of evolution, did that stillness ripple forward? Maybe that's why we flinch. Maybe that's why we freeze on dark paths when we hear rustling leaves. Maybe something deep in us remembers stillness as salvation. The sky darkens just slightly, or maybe the canopy thickens. Either way, you hear the forest breathing again. Long, slow exhales, like lungs the size of continents. And somewhere buried in a stone that used to be mud, a heartbeat slows to nothing, but doesn't stop. You follow a narrow ridge down to where the earth once softened into a floodplain, now cracked into slabs by time and tectonics. The stones here are darker coal-streaked and layered like old parchment left out in the rain. Each line tells you something, if you're patient enough to read it. Tonight we're reading ghosts, but not the kind that moan or float or slam cupboards. These are stranger. Sleepwalkers. Bodies that moved or almost moved after they died. You're staring now at a strange fossil. It's not impressive at first glance. No claws, no dramatic teeth, no symmetrical marvel of engineering. Just a faint lizard-sized smear across rock. But the longer you look, the weirder it gets. Because it's off. The spine's twisted, not broken, just oddly kinked. The legs are splayed, but one is subtly shifted. And the tail. It curves at an unnatural angle as though it tried to move, after everything else had stopped. Authoritative fact. Some fossilized animals show post-mortem shifts, subtle movements caused by dehydration, gas buildup, or the slow collapse of muscle. This phenomenon is called post-mortem locomotion. It's well documented in fish, reptiles, and even some early birds. The body twitches. Limbs curl, sometimes it appears to crawl a few centimeters. Not alive, but not quite still either. You squint at the slab and imagine that moment. Casineria, freshly dead or nearly so, resting in the mud. The heat bakes it slowly. Its tendons tighten. One limb jerks, a final twitch. The tail drags slightly, it leaves a mark. And 300 million years later, you're standing over that mark, wondering if it meant something. Historians still debate whether these slight distortions are meaningful behavior or just the anatomy unraveling. But the fossil record doesn't distinguish between intention and reflex. It only records motion. You feel a chill crawl up your arm. Not the scary kind, the ancient kind. Like you just realized the shadows in the corner of the room have always been there, you just stopped noticing them. And now you're wondering how many death poses are just nervous system leftovers. Echoes of creatures trying to stand back up. Not dramatic reanimation. Nothing Hollywood. Just reluctance. Odd fact time. Decapitated snakes can still bite. Chickens can run without heads. Even some frogs have twitched back to life hours after clinical death. Biology is a mess. A stubborn, flailing mess. And maybe that's what you're looking at here, a body so wired for stillness it didn't know when to give up. You crouch beside another fossil, this one with a drag mark trailing behind it. The body's complete, but the tail is smeared as if it had been gently pulled. No predator tracks, no scavenger scratches, just movement. Like the swamp had second thoughts. Here's a theory no one in academia will publish, but plenty whisper. Some of these early reptiles didn't die all at once. They shut down in pieces. A heartbeat here, a flicker of brainstem there, like a city losing power one block at a time. You imagine Casineria lying in the mud, eyes half-lidded, body limp but not totally surrendered. The world shifts around it, floodwater, sediment time. But for a moment, something in it stirs, a signal misfiring. A leg twitches, the imprint deepens. You blink and realize you've been holding your breath. You laugh quietly, then cough. The swamp echoes nothing back. Here are your 3 darkly charming jokes. Casineria, the only fossil that left a Yelp review in tail drag. 1 star, too damp. Some creatures go quietly into the night. Others go twitching like a broken toy with trust issues. If you've ever woken up from a nap confused about your own limbs, you and Casineria might be cousins. You walk a little farther over a slope of broken stone and fern impressions. Everywhere you look, there are half marks, drag lines, compressions, smears, as if these animals refuse to die without nudging history one last time. But then it hits you, what if some of those twitches weren't post-mortem at all? What if Casineria had more than just a freeze trick? What if it had mastered the art of fooling the world into thinking it was already dead down to the detail? A tail dragged half a centimeter to make it look like rigor mortis. A foot twisted slightly just wrong to mimic a death spasm. What if playing dead wasn't just a pose but a performance? Historians still debate the cognitive abilities of early amniotes. Did they understand cause and effect? Could they fake behavior? Or was it all instinct sharpened by time and trial? You stare at one more fossil, this one bizarre. The entire body looks melted, distorted, but closer inspection shows a pattern. The tail is always at the same angle, the limbs always splayed the same way. Too consistent for coincidence, too neat for nature. Maybe it's not a death twitch. Maybe it's a ritual. Casineria didn't just freeze its stage its stillness like a trapdoor spider shaping its burrow. A posture refined across generations, not to scream but to almost scream, just enough to get passed over. And it worked. You're still here, still watching, still unsure if that tail mark is twitch or trick. You've wandered too deep now. The swamp doesn't end, but it forgets you. Every step forward feels like a step sideways in time, and the deeper you go, the more you begin to suspect that nothing here is exactly dead. You crouch beside another fossil slab, this one partially embedded in the floor of what was once a shallow stream bed. The bones are almost gone, just faint outlines in the rock, but the shape is familiar. Slender body, long tail, limbs tucked close, Casineria again, or something close. Or something that watched it walk, learned something from it, and then went very still for the next 100 million years. Authoritative fact. The amniote lineage. Those early vertebrates that evolved to lay eggs on land split off during the late Carboniferous or early Permian period. That means some of the creatures in these swamps aren't just early reptiles. They're the ancestors of everything with a dry egg and a spinal cord. Reptiles, birds, mammals, you. Yes, you. The thing curled in this rock might have shared your bloodline before bloodlines were even a concept. And it passed something down, not speed, not size, not strength, but stillness. That's the punchline. You, with your thumbs and your taxes and your playlists, descend from something that learned how to not move so convincingly it was mistaken for dead by predators and possibly now by you. You touch the stone. There's a faint ridge near the fossil's flank, a raised edge just a few millimeters thick. Not part of the body, just something. A suggestion, like a ripple in the mud that never fully faded. It looks almost like another body curled beside the first. Not complete. Just enough to make you wonder if the dead one had company, or maybe a witness. Oh. Historians still debate how many of these animals lived in groups or pairs. Some argue for communal nesting. Others insist they were solitary, only meeting to mate or compete. But the fossil record gives us these strange pairings, two bodies near each other, always just offset. Like one went still and the other watched too long. Odd fact break modern blue-tongued skinks sometimes fake death so well that they can trick their own offspring into abandoning them. Survival, yes. Parenting, questionable. You scan the rock again and notice something that shouldn't be there, a mark in the empty space. A partial tail drag, but no body, as if something moved away after the fossilization of the one that stayed. It's a haunting possibility that some of these fossils are the left-behinds, that one animal faked death so well it survived, the other didn't. And now you're left staring at one half of a story. Your jokes tonight come in three flavors of unnerving: Casineria ghosting predators and paleontologists since the late Carboniferous. Evolution didn't give them weapons. It gave them a PhD in awkward silences. Somewhere in this fossil record is a lizard who said, "No thanks to extinction," and just waited it out. You sit on a boulder shaped like a giant thumbprint and look out at the canopy. The same trees, the same spores in the air. And you think back on the line of stillness this little lizard might have started. Because if Casinarius passed anything down, it wasn't a body plan, it was a philosophy. Stay quiet. Blend in. Let the noise pass. Let the disasters burn themselves out. You, yes, you, the person lying on their couch watching this, have ancestors who did exactly that. When the forest caught fire, when the sky went dark, when the oceans churned, and the planet screamed extinction, your family tree sat very, very still and outweighted it. That's why you're here. Not because they were faster, but because they knew when not to move. You trace the fossil one last time. The rock is cold. The story inside it is not. It's stubborn, it's patient. It blinked first, then stopped blinking, then started again millions of years later with you. You're sitting now, arms wrapped around your knees, not because you're cold, but because it suddenly feels like the right posture to occupy in a place where every creature that survived did so by curling inward. Around you, the swamp is louder than usual. Not in sound, but in presence. The trees hum with their old breath. The air is thick with unseen things, moss spores, ancient bacteria, thoughts that haven't died yet. And beneath all that, a principle is slowly crystallizing. Stillness isn't surrender, it's strategy. That idea feels rebellious in a world that rewards noise. You live in a time where the loudest voice wins the algorithm, where flashing lights means success and panic is sold as productivity. But here, 300 million years ago, nothing chases applause, it just waits and wins. Authoritative fact. Across modern animal behavior, freezing is one of the most successful anti-predator responses in the natural world. Deer, reptiles, birds, and even fish all use it. Scientists call it tonic immobility when it's involuntary and freezing behavior when it's strategic. And it works. Predators often abandon still prey in favor of something more obviously alive. But Casineria didn't just freeze. It perfected the posture. It didn't look afraid. It looked uninterested, disengaged, as though it had already left the conversation and the world just hadn't caught up yet. You brush your hand across a stone slab displaying not just one fossil, but a faint ring of indentations surrounding it, small footmarks barely perceptible. They form a circle, like something approached the still creature, sniffed, circled, then walked away. Historians still debate whether such formations are coincidental or if they reflect real interactions, predator-prey moments captured in stone. But this one, it's personal. The steps are tentative, no pounce, no struggle, just curiosity, followed by disinterest. Casineria didn't escape. It was dismissed. There's something powerful about that. Odd fact. In 2010, researchers discovered that some cuttlefish not only freeze when threatened, but mimic the texture and shape of surrounding rocks while doing so. It's not just stillness, it's stillness with style. And that's what's starting to haunt you. You begin to see this lizard not as timid, but theatrical. A minimalist performer. No fangs, no roars, no chase scenes. Just the most convincing impression of already dead nature ever produced. You stand stretching out legs that are considerably worse at pretending to be trees. Something crunches softly beneath your boot. You look down. Not bones, just fern fragments and bark impressions. But for a second it felt like you'd stepped on someone's patience. Here's a fossil that pushes the whole narrative to the edge. A small creature preserved mid-curl, but this time one eye socket has been crushed, clean, sharp, the rest of the skeleton untouched. You crouch low. Did something test it? Bite once, then stop. Or did the pressure of the mud collapse the skull? Millennia later. Or, and this is the one that makes your stomach twist, did a predator try to kill it and fail? Casineria might have flinched just wrong. Just right. Just enough to feel dead without actually being it. That blur between behavior and biology is a line evolution dances across with no shame. Fake it till you fossilize. Here are your 3 survival sarcasm snacks. If Casineria had a motto, it'd be do less, survive more. This lizard didn't just play dead. It rebranded as sediment. In the prehistoric job interview of Life Casineria, aced the part where they asked, "Tell us about a time you disappeared under pressure." You wander into a grove where the fossils lie scattered like punctuation. Ellipses, commas, parentheses. All curled, all cautious. You can practically hear them breathing. Or not breathing. Same result. You think about how fear works. In most modern animals, freezing isn't just a reaction, it's deeply wired. The brainstem takes over, heart rate slows, vision tunnels. The animal vanishes inside its own body, hoping the world forgets it's edible. And here's what's eerie that's still in you. You've probably done it. At the sound of bad news, at the touch of a memory. In the middle of a sentence you didn't want to finish. Your ancestors did it better. They made it into an art form. So, when Casineria curled up under a leaf or slipped into a hollow stump or folded into its own breath and disappeared, it wasn't giving up. It was calculating. Stillness is not the absence of strength. It's the concentration of it. You press your hand to the fossil again, and for a moment it feels like it's pressing back. Not to communicate, not to haunt. Just to remind you sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not react. Let the danger come. Let it circle. Let it get bored. Then blink. You're lying flat now, belly to stone nose nearly touching a fossil that doesn't quite want to be seen. The air is still but not asleep. It's watching you through leaves, through mist, through memory. And you finally understand something. Not all fossils are silent. Some of them are listening. You're face to face with a skull. Small, smooth. One side flattened by eons of pressure, the other remarkably intact. The eye socket is perfect, a hollow orb framed by fine bone ridges. And what grabs you most isn't the shape, it's the angle. This lizard isn't staring straight ahead. It's angled upward, slightly. Curiously, as if the moment before death or deep stillness, it turned its gaze towards something. You shift your perspective. Tilt your own head. That hollow socket catches the ambient light and reflects it just faintly. And for a second, you feel like it sees you. Authoritative fact. Some fossilized animals, particularly well-preserved skulls, retain orbital positioning that allows paleontologists to infer eye direction and field of vision. In Casineria and its kin, forward-facing sockets suggest more than passive observation. They hint at spatial awareness, active tracking, maybe even curiosity. But this one, it doesn't look curious. It looks awake. You sit up slowly. This isn't a death pose. Not entirely. There's no spasmed neck, no twisted spine. The limbs are neatly folded. The ribs are relaxed. The fossil doesn't scream. It waits. Historians still debate whether these so-called alert postures mean anything. Some argue it's coincidence, just the way bodies settle. Others think it suggests the animal was conscious or even vigilant at the time it was entombed. But what kind of creature watches the end approach without flinching? Casineria, apparently. Odd fact interlude. Some modern lizards can control their eyelids independently. One eye scans the sky, the other watches the ground. It's not multitasking, it's survival. Focus is a luxury. Awareness is mandatory. And here's where things get weird. Several fossils from the Carboniferous show eye sockets that weren't crushed flat like the rest of the skull. They're preserved open as if the mud filled them gently, carefully. Like the eyes stayed wide long after the heartbeat stopped. You run your fingers along the rock's edge and feel the impression of the body. It's curled, yes, but not tight. It's almost contemplative. You know that feeling when a cat sits on your chest and stares at nothing? This fossil radiates that same unnerving calm. And you wonder, was Casineria simply faking death? Or was it meditating on it? Here's your unnerving comedy trio for tonight. He died doing what he loved, staring uncomfortably into the abyss. Casineria proof that even 300 million years ago, someone was always watching and refusing to blink. If looks could kill this lizard, still wouldn't have had to move. You lean back now, letting your eyes adjust to the dimness, and notice something you'd missed before. There are other fossils here. Half-formed, scattered, a femur, a jaw fragment, bits of things that didn't lie still enough to earn full preservation. They panicked, flailed, got torn apart, or washed away. But this one kept its head up. It waited with its eyes open. Historians still argue whether consciousness can be inferred from fossil positioning. But even if this pose is just a coincidence, just a beautiful accident, it has meaning now. Because you're giving it meaning. You think about how many animals bury their heads, hide their faces. But Casineria stared. Maybe it saw the water rising. Maybe it felt the soil soften. Maybe it heard the predator's breath just beyond the leaves and didn't run, didn't hide, didn't even blink. You remember that predators are looking for motion, for panic, for limbs thrashing, for something that screams alive. But Casineria knew this secret. Don't just fake death, fake peace. Stillness doesn't always mean fear. Sometimes it means defiance. You shift your weight and hear a faint crack. The slab under your hand shifts and you see it, a second fossil beneath the first. Smaller, nearly invisible, and its skull tilted the same way. Two lizards, both buried with their eyes pointed up, both watching something you'll never see. You close your eyes for a moment and the image stays behind your eyelids. The shallow forest floor leaf litter whispering, and a creature who didn't die in fear. It just lay still, breathing, watching, knowing that the world wouldn't believe it was alive if it refused to prove otherwise. You haven't spoken in a while. That's all right. The forest prefers it that way. This far into deep time, words feel like an intrusion. Everything around you is either ancient extinct or thinking very hard about pretending to be both. You're standing at the base of an exposed slope, a fallen wall of fossil-rich sediment where roots once coiled and creatures once burrowed, and just ahead there's a peculiar patch of stone. Flattened, smooth, empty at first glance, but then you see it, a faint handprint. Or maybe not a hand. Something smaller, more cautious, pressed in, held for just a second too long, then gone. It's the outline of absence. The mark left behind by something that tried very hard not to be remembered. And that brings us to the eternal academic bar fight. Did Casineria fake death, or are we faking understanding? Historians versus paleontologists versus ghosts. Because the line between dead and fossilized isn't a sharp edge, it's a smudge. And when you start asking, did this animal intend to look dead? You're stepping into the murkiest territory of all animal intention. Behavior without witness. Authoritative fact. In paleontology, interpretations of fossilized behavior like playing dead, nesting, or even caring for young are considered highly speculative unless supported by multiple contextual specimens. That doesn't stop us from trying, but there's no fossil record of a thought. Only poses, positions, patterns, and even those can be lies. You're staring now at a trio of fossils displayed in a clean, polished slab. All three are coiled. All three point in different directions. And not a single one has damage consistent with being attacked. Were they buried by the same flood, or did they just agree silently to vanish together? You run a finger along the middle fossil. It's almost dramatic. The tail curves elegantly, the limbs tucked just so, like a dancer caught mid-performance, or a lizard that once saw a predator approach and said, "Here, this is where I disappear." Odd fact. Some insects and reptiles, notably certain beetles and snakes, go into such a deep, immobile state that their body temperature matches their environment. Their heartbeat becomes undetectable and they stop reacting even when flipped over or nudged. It's called thanatosis, and it works so well that researchers sometimes mistake these animals for corpses and throw them away. Which, if you're the lizard, is exactly the point. Historians still argue whether behaviors like this qualify as intelligence or are simply mechanical responses evolved by luck. But there's something uncomfortable about assuming survival is ever just luck. And this fossil, it doesn't feel lucky. It feels deliberate. Here's your trio of dry-bone jokes. Casineria, master of method acting, never broke character even for extinction. The line between death and drama is just a good lighting choice. This lizard didn't die. It just took a very, very convincing nap. You sit on a warm rock. Well, it feels warm because your imagination has been doing laps. And think about what we mean when we say something is faking. Is it deception or strategy? Did Casineria intend to fool a predator? Or did it just have the right reflex at the right time and live long enough for that reflex to be inherited, polished, passed down? You realize you're not asking questions about a fossil anymore. You're asking questions about yourself, because humans fake things too. Sleep, confidence, eye contact, sometimes even happiness, and we do it to survive. We say I'm fine with the same poise Casineria said I'm dead. Different predator, same tactic. You look back at the fossil slab and feel a tiny flicker of guilt. We've been calling it dead for decades, labeling it as a specimen, cataloging it as a conclusion. But what if it wasn't? What if we just interrupted something? Because here's the thing about faking death, it only works if someone believes you. And for 300 million years we've believed it. We believed Casineria died here. We wrote papers about it. We gave it an exhibit label. We told kids on tours this is where it ended. But maybe, just maybe, this is where it paused. You've circled back now. Not in space, there are no circles here, only spirals, but in thought. The path winds downward again toward a place that looks familiar. Yes, there it is. The slab. The one we started with. A quiet rectangle of stone, smooth-edged and spotlighted beneath a glass panel in a museum basement, or maybe just in your memory. You know, the one, the fossil with the eye socket angled slightly up like it never quite agreed to stop watching. You press your hand to the glass. The lizard inside doesn't blink. Of course it doesn't. But you've learned a few things since you met it. You've learned that it didn't roar, didn't hunt, didn't flee, that it might have invented something we still don't fully understand. The ability to survive not by action but by inaction. By faking stillness so perfectly it blurred the border between death and invisibility. Authoritative fact. The fossil known as Casineria kitty, discovered in Scotland in the 1990s, is considered one of the earliest known amniotes. Its name means little cheese lizard due to the rock it was found in, yes, really, and it represents a transitional form, neither fully amphibian nor reptile, but a whisper between the two. It's known only from partial remains. What we think we know about it has always come from incomplete data, interpreted through long shadows. You stare at that fossil and feel a creeping doubt. Not about the science, but about the silence between it. Because for every curled-up fossil, there are 1,000 that vanished clean. No bones, no impressions, no proof, just absence. Historians still debate what counts as survival. Is it the species? The behavior? The memory? Did Casineria survive through its descendants? Through the instinct it passed down? Or did it vanish unnoticed while a cousin with better PR took the credit? Odd fact. There's a beetle in the Namib Desert that survives by standing still at dawn and letting fog condense on its back, literally drinking from the air. That's survival by stillness, by knowing when not to move, not to act, not to seek. And you begin to realize the truth. Casineria didn't fake death. Not exactly. It faked time. It tricked deep history into carrying it forward. It didn't last as a body. It lasted as a behavior, a shape, a pause. You think about all the creatures that followed the frogs that freeze solid, the snakes that stop their hearts, the birds that go torpid on cold nights, the deer that freeze mid-step, the possum, of course, who collapses like it got a bad text. And even us humans who sometimes hold our breath before we walk into a room. It's not just survival. It's theater. It's the grand ancient art of stillness. And Casineria was the first master. Here are your last 3 whispered jokes laid gently across the stone like offerings. Casineria probably didn't invent pretending to be dead, but definitely did it better than anyone else and never bragged. This lizard didn't go extinct. It just took the world's longest coffee break. If evolution had an introvert badge, Casineria earned it before there were even mammals to judge. You look once more as the fossil. That coiled body, that careful posture, that eye socket that still seems to ask, "Are you sure I'm gone?" And you finally answer no. You're not gone. You never were. You're still here in every pause before a decision, in every breath held in a crowd, in every moment a creature decides not to move because movement is loud and stillness is strategy. Casineria didn't fake death. It outweighted it. And in a quiet corner of the world, it's still waiting. You've made it to the end, or maybe just to the stillest part of the spiral. The story of Casineria wasn't one of triumph, domination, or flash. It was one of resistance through stillness, of a creature so small, so soft-boned, and so quiet that it became nearly invisible not just to predators but to time itself. It faked death with such precision that 300 million years later, we're still not sure if it was a trick or reflex or a quiet philosophy handed down through the generations. It didn't roar, it didn't run, it didn't chase anything down, but it remained. Through coiled postures and vanishing trackways, through mimicry and leaf litter camouflage, through burrows and wide waiting eyes. It stayed still, it listened, and it passed down the art of survival through silence. And now, here you are, centuries and continents away, watching your own breath rise in the dark, wondering what else around you is only pretending to be still. So next time you hesitate or hold your breath or stay quiet when everything else is screaming, know that it's not weakness. It's memory. It's strategy. It's prehistoric. Thank you for walking with me into the long hush of deep time. Let me know where you watched from and what hour it is where you are. I'd like to think Casineria would have wanted that. Now close your eyes, turn down the lights, and join the long waiting stillness that came before everything else.